If your business only works when you are awake, available, and personally checking every moving part, then you do not own a business. You own a very expensive stress machine. And that's the hook today, because this lesson is about 5 millionaire and billionaire CEOs who credit clear process documentation with their success. Not hustle alone, not charisma alone, not vision boards alone. I mean, sure, vision matters, but vision without documentation usually turns into confusion. So here's the contrarian take right up front. Most founders do not have a motivation problem. They have a memory problem. They have a tribal knowledge problem. They have a everything lives in my head and my Slack messages and random Loom videos problem. And that matters more now than ever because in 2026, speed is cheap. AI is cheap. Delegation is easier than ever. But clarity? Clarity is still rare. And when you scale a messy business, you do not scale freedom, you scale mistakes. So, what are we covering? We're going to look at 5 high-level operators who, in different ways, show the same principle. When your thinking gets written down, when decisions become repeatable, when standards get documented, the business stops depending on your mood, your memory, and your heroics. And if you're a business owner listening to this thinking, yeah, but I've tried delegating and people still mess it up, good. That's exactly the pain point. Because usually, the issue is not that your people are lazy, it's that your process is fuzzy. Let's start with Jeff Bezos. What made Amazon dangerous was not just size, it was disciplined clarity. One of the best-known examples is the 6-page memo culture. Instead of showing up and winging it with vague slides, leaders had to think deeply enough to write a coherent narrative. That's documentation doing strategy work. Bezos understood something founders hate to admit. If an idea cannot survive contact with clear written thinking, it probably isn't ready to scale. And that is brutal, but true, because writing exposes holes. Writing forces trade-offs. Writing kills fake clarity. So if you're running a business right now and your team keeps saying, I thought you meant this, or I wasn't sure what good looked like, that's your 6-page memo lesson in miniature. Amazon-level companies do not rely on mind reading, they rely on documented thinking. And that's the first big point of this lesson. Documentation is not just for operations, it is for decision quality. It sharpens thinking before it scales execution. Now, let's bring that down to founder reality. You may not need a 6-page memo for every decision, but if pricing, onboarding, fulfillment, follow-up, and client communication still live in your head, then you are still operating like a bottleneck wearing a CEO costume.
CEO number 2 is Dan Martell. And I love this example because it's practical. It's not just be more disciplined. It's like, here is how you get your life back. Martell has hammered this idea over and over. Stop obsessing over heroic effort and start building repeatable systems. In the recent material surfaced for this research, his whole approach keeps circling one truth. Goals are weak if they're not supported by a system you can actually run every week. And for business owners, that means this. The moment you do something twice, it is probably a candidate for documentation. Not later, not when things come down, right then. This is why his worldview connects so strongly with SOP thinking, because the founder who says, I'll explain it live every time, is accidentally creating a company with no memory, and a company with no memory cannot compound. So if you're always re-answering the same client questions, retraining the same task, refixing the same handoff, or rechecking the same deliverable, that is not a people problem first. It is a missing process problem first. And that's why documentation gives you leverage. It turns your one-time thinking into an asset. CEO number 3 is Alex Hormozy. And what stands out in the recent Hormozy content is how relentlessly he pushes repeatability over inspiration. Systems, managerial frameworks, clear expectations, predictable execution. That's the game, not random bursts of founder energy. Hormozy's world is basically a giant case study in this principle. If the business only performs when the owner is close enough to touch everything, the business is still fragile. If every department depends on one smart person improvising, the business is still fragile. And that's the painful truth a lot of owners avoid. They think their business is custom, unique, too nuanced to document. But usually what they mean is, I haven't slowed down long enough to make the invisible visible. That's why clear process documentation matters now. Because AI can accelerate work, yes, but if your underlying process is unclear, AI just helps you produce wrong things faster. A confused team with faster tools is still a confused team. So when Hormozy talks systems, or when Martell talks operating through repeatable structure, the lesson underneath is the same. Freedom comes from standards. Growth comes from standards. Delegation works when standards exist. And I want you to hear that like a founder, not like a student, because this is not theory. This is the difference between taking a weekend off and checking your phone every 11 minutes because deep down you know nothing really runs without you. CEO number 4 is Brian Scudamore, the founder behind 1-800-GOT-JUNK and the broader operating machine he built from what started as a single truck. And this is where documentation gets really real, because franchisable, repeatable growth does not happen through vibes. When you build something that can expand across locations, teams, and leaders, you need the business to behave consistently. Same standards, same customer experience, same operational logic. And that means the founder has to translate instinct into systems. Scudamore's story is powerful because it shows what process does for scale. It takes something that began founder-dependent and makes it transferable. And the moment a business becomes transferable, it becomes more valuable. Not just easier to run, more valuable. That matters if you ever want to sell, step back, or stop being the single point of failure. CEO number 5 is Tom Bilyeu, and what makes the Bilyeu example useful is that he represents the founder who understands culture, mission, and intensity, but still knows that execution cannot stay abstract. At scale, belief alone is not enough. Standards have to become teachable. Behaviors have to become repeatable. The company needs operational memory. So across Bezos, Martell, Hormozy, Scudamore, and Bilyeu, you get 5 different flavors of the same truth. Clear documentation is not bureaucracy. It is stored intelligence. It is leadership that survives your absence. Now, why does this matter right now for the average business owner? Because the pain is always the same. You work 50 to 70 hours a week, you try to delegate, but you end up redoing the work anyway. A 2-week vacation feels risky. Every new hire becomes another training project. Document the process keeps getting pushed to next week. Nothing moves unless you approve it. If any of that sounds familiar, you are not failing because you care too much. You are failing to escape because your business is under-documented. And that's why the Pro Sulum angle matters here. Pro Sulum isn't just saying, hey, outsource more tasks. The positioning is stronger than that. The idea is document, replicate, scale. In other words, do not just throw labor at the problem. Build operational memory while the work is getting done. That's a huge distinction, because a generic assistant often needs constant oversight, but a systems-minded operator documents the way the work should happen, tightens the handoff, reduces overlap, shortens feedback loops, and turns random execution into dependable execution. That's also why Pro Sulum's ecosystem makes sense together. If someone needs a quick gut check, there's quiz.myprosulum.com, a 2-minute systemization score. If they need to start documenting a task fast, there's instant.myprosulum.com, the free SOP generator. If they want a lightweight training path, there's systemize.com. And if they want the full bridge from insight to implementation, that's prosulum.com.
So, let's land this. The big lesson here is not, rich CEOs like documents. That would be silly. The lesson is that high-level operators understand something most small businesses learn too late. If your business, cannot explain itself clearly, it cannot scale cleanly. Jeff Bezos shows you that documented thinking sharpens decisions. Dan Martell shows you that repeatable systems beat heroic effort. Alex Hormozy shows you that management gets stronger when expectations are structured. Brian Scudamore shows you that scale requires transferability. Tom Bilyeu shows you that mission-driven growth still needs teachable execution. And the common denominator is this: documentation makes excellence less accidental. Now, if this hits a nerve, it's probably because you can feel exactly where the business is leaking. Maybe it's onboarding, maybe it's sales follow-up, maybe it's fulfillment, maybe it's client communication. Maybe it's just that too much of the company still lives in your head. That is where Pro Sulum's VSA model becomes interesting, because the promise is not just support. It's like implementation plus documentation. It's building the business so it can run with less founder drag. It's bringing in people who help document and replicate what already works across 40-plus industries, and typically at around half the cost of comparable in-house hires. It's the difference between getting more busy and getting more scalable. And the current messaging around Pro Sulum reinforces that really well. Thousands of business owners served, strong retention, meaningful hours reclaimed every week, a high talent bar, and tools that make systemization easier to start than most founders assume. In other words, the bridge between insight and implementation is not more theory. It is documented action. So, if this hit a nerve, click the link. Seriously, take the 2-minute assessment at quiz.myprosulum.com or generate your first SOP at instant.myprosulum.com or go straight to prosulum.com and book a free discovery call. Because once you can see the bottleneck clearly, you do not need more guilt, you need a system. And once you have a system, you do not need to keep being the hero every day. All right, that's the lesson. Thanks for hanging out with me. Keep building smart, keep documenting what works, and I'll see you in the next one.